Hello and welcome back, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. This will be the reading of A Silenced Songbird. This fic was written by me and sits just over 6,800 words. It is rated mature for containing graphic depictions of violence and major character death. A major warning before you listen to this further: there is, of course, graphic depictions of violence, there is some small gore, there is sewage, emotional manipulation, child abuse, and implied suicide. This can be heavy. It's not for everyone, so just please really pay attention to those warnings before you continue. If you're still here, though, I'll read you the summary. Hitoshi was always meant to fly, to sing his song to all the world, but when a bad adoption placement ends him in the hands of two monsters in human skin, his song will quickly be silenced. A couple stood outside of Akito and Ren's adoption services, twiddling their thumbs nervously. "When will we get to meet him?" the woman, Isano Shinso, asked. "After all those fees and paperwork, we still haven't even seen his face yet." "Don't worry, he's gonna be perfect," Kataza Shinso assured his wife. "An honor roll kid with a flashy quirk." The foster care office's receptionist raised an eyebrow at this, but said nothing. This kid had been passed around several times already, after all. The Shinso family might not be the agency's first choice, but it was the only one that they had left. "Well, you're all set with your home study and background checks, so you're free to meet Hitoshi today if you'd like," the receptionist smiled, pointing to a doorway leading to the back offices. "He's waiting for you in room 7. It's the second door on your right." Isano and Kataza thanked the woman, rushing to meet their new son. When they opened the door, they were met with the sight of a raggedy-looking, lanky boy wearing an old gray hoodie, clutching a garbage bag which likely held all of his earthly possessions inside. "Hey," the boy greeted, avoiding eye contact with the two adults. "I'm Hitoshi. Thanks for letting me stay with—" "What's your quirk?" Isano asked immediately, a greedy look in her eye. It wasn't her fault if she wanted a child with a flashy, powerful quirk. After all, how could she be expected to retire in this economy without being the mother of a hero? With bated breath, the couple waited to hear Hitoshi's response. Like a cornered animal, he cowered before their gaze, all too familiar with this type of adult and of the response he would receive afterwards. Like he struggled to release the words from his tongue, a word was spoken into the air, a singular word that would be the sole cause of all of Hitoshi Shinso's misery, torment, and agony. Brainwashing. "This is fine," Hitoshi thought to himself as he was led into a well-furnished, single-family home in the center of Mochizuki City. Even after he was led away from the living areas and into the cold, dank basement, Hitoshi tried to think positively. "I've been in worse foster homes. This family seems like they have money. At least I won't be crammed in with another dozen kids like last time." After a tense, whispered conversation between the couple, they broke apart and Isano turned to Hitoshi. "Kataza just needs to make a quick run to Technovision, so while I cook some dinner, why don't you explore your new room?" Hitoshi raised an eyebrow. "Technovision? But that's a quirk support item shop." "Whatever. Maybe Kataza needs something for his quirk. It's not like it's my business." Instead, Hitoshi said, "But there's no bed down here." The words, "Where am I supposed to sleep?" went unspoken. Hitoshi knew what happened when he asked questions around his foster families. Isano looked down at Hitoshi from where she stood on the stairs, a disdainful look on her face. I mean, Hitoshi corrected himself, not eager to get himself on his new family's bad side so soon. "I have some clothes and stuff in my bag. I can make do." Isano smiled. "That's great. Just stay down here. We'll be back later." With that, the basement door clicked shut, and if Hitoshi wasn't mistaken, a second click could be heard soon after. Was that? No. They wouldn't lock me in. Isano seems so nice, she wouldn't do that. Hitoshi sighed, dropping his garbage bag on the cold stone floor. "Home sweet home," he spoke sarcastically. Still, as grim as the situation may seem, it wasn't all bad. While the basement wasn't furnished, it wasn't cramped either. The floor may be unfinished, but there weren't any water leaks or exposed piping. As long as Hitoshi could just decorate a bit, it might feel more like a real living space. It took 2 hours for Isano to return, and when she did, it was with a paper plate with some sort of Italian pasta and a green plastic cup of water. This was strange, since from what Hitoshi had smelled when Asano was cooking, she was making fried rice and also grilling meat. Regardless, Hitoshi stepped up to greet the woman, ready to leave the basement. "Oh, don't worry," she said cheerfully in response, passing the dishes into Hitoshi's hands. "You're allowed to eat in your room." "Oh, sure," Hitoshi replied, slowly walking back down to the makeshift bedding he had constructed out of his clothing. Just as Hitoshi was trying to convince himself to look on the bright side, Asano cut in with, "Please keep your room cleaner. Leaving your things out all over the floor right after you move in. I expected better from you, Hitoshi." With that, the door closed again, leaving the boy in the dim light, alone once more. The sun set as he swallowed down the warm pasta despite his distaste. As the sky got darker, the singular window sitting up high in the room left the boy in total darkness. He slept restlessly, tossing and turning, the quiet sound of a lock clicking echoing in his brain. They wouldn't, he thought as he slowly ascended the basement stairs through the dark. When he reached the door, his fingers fumbled before finding the knob, a faint crack of light his only guide in the darkness. Clunk. "No, no, 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 no," Hitoshi whispered, trying in vain to extricate himself from the basement. Nothing worked. He was locked in. When Hitoshi awoke the next morning, it was to the feeling of his head being lifted into the air. "Hey!" he yelled, but as soon as his mouth was open, a metal rod was inserted into his mouth, settling between the backs of his molars. With a snapping sound, the rod was fastened onto the boy's face, with a chin strap and nose guard keeping it in place. Hitoshi whipped his head up to see Kataza standing overhead, the man fiddling with the strange contraption around the boy's skull. Hitoshi tried to scream, to question the man, plea for help, anything. He even, for a split second, considered using his quirk to brainwash Kataza. It wouldn't matter anyways. The boy's mouth was locked firmly in place, the metal rod preventing his tongue from forming any words. He was almost completely silenced, but for his ability to growl and scream, the guttural noises requiring no such fine-tuning. Hitoshi Shinso had been reduced to an animal. "Oh, calm down," Kataza said, the first words he had spoken to Hitoshi. "I can't be expected to live with you, considering your quirk. Now, can I? This device just stops you from asking any questions. As long as you wear it, we can be the happy family you've always wanted." Kataza smiled down at Hitoshi, a sick, savage grin on his face. Hitoshi had mistaken that grin before as being kind, but he could no longer foolishly believe that was the case. "Here, eat this and get ready, you're going to school." Kataja pushed another paper plate and that same green plastic cup into Hitoshi's hands. Hitoshi had always hated green. "School?" Hitoshi tried to ask, but he was unable to form even such a simple word. Instead, he almost choked on his own saliva as it caught in the back of his throat. Kataza just glared at the boy. "That sounded like a question. Any more of that and you'll start losing privileges." The man lifted Hitoshi's chin up to meet his gaze, hot breath hitting the boy's face. "You're only living under this roof because I was kind enough to take you in. Would you rather be living on the street?" Shinso pulled himself out of the man's grip and shook his head, eyes downcast. "Good." Putting in his last word, Kataza turned to leave, but as he reached the door, he paused and turned. "If we let you upstairs, you'll run like we've heard you did with all your other families, so if you need a bathroom, just use that." The man pointed, and when Hitoshi turned, he saw a white, 5-gallon bucket he hadn't seen there yesterday. The boy's face screwed up in disgust, looking at the bucket as if it personally offended him. When the man was gone, Hitoshi turned to his breakfast and began the ordeal of trying to eat. It was a much more difficult task when your tongue was held down, so when he tried his best to swallow down a mouthful of rice porridge, it just got caught in the back of his throat. Frantically, he poured a mouthful of water into his mouth, hoping to dissolve it, but without the ability to swallow, he was just left choking, gagging on the taste of warm metal and heaving for air. "Please," Hitoshi thought, as he lay on his back, gasping for air like a fish out of water. "I need to get out of here. And fast." Hitoshi walked through the halls of Mochizuki Middle School, led by Asano Shinso. They walked until they reached a door marked 3F. Asano opened the door and led Hitoshi inside. "Oh, Miss Shinso." The teacher in the room greeted the woman. "I was told you'd be coming. Thank you so much for taking your ward here today. I've heard he can be quite the troublemaker." "Oh, it's no bother." Asano shrugged off the teacher, guiding the boy to the front of the class in a motion that seemed gentle, but to Hitoshi it felt like her nails were digging into his neck, every tug scratching against his collarbone roughly. "I ask that everyone takes care of my little Hitoshi. He struggles with his quirk, you know. Brainwashing. It's such a dreadful power, but his little brace helps with that, so don't worry, you'll all be safe." She almost cheered at this last bit, but Hitoshi could see what she was doing. The way she insisted on coming to school with him, how she accidentally mentioned his quirk. This woman was doing everything she could to isolate him, ensuring that every second at the school would be torture, just like all the other schools were. With a tug, Asano pushed Hitoshi's head down with her own, bowing in front of the class. "Please take care of my son," she begged before standing up once more. Quiet laughter rippled through the room, and Hitoshi could feel his face turning flaming red with embarrassment. As Asano turned to leave, she met Hitoshi's eye, and for that split second, he saw the smug, self-satisfied grin on her face before the door shut, leaving him alone with a whole new animal. Middle school children with a near endless supply of ammo. "Mama's boy, aren't you?" A boy with long, green hair and antennae mocked, brushing past Hitoshi's shoulder as they stood in line for lunch. Hitoshi turned, a perfect insult on the tip of his tongue, but it came out as a slobbery, breathy groan. The boy just cackled, poking his friend's shoulder. Look, he can't even talk properly." The first boy's friend, a hairy, muscled student, laughed. "I wonder if it's the muzzle, or if he just never learned. He doesn't look all that bright, if you know what I'm saying." Hitoshi's eyes nearly glowed with rage, but just before he could start swinging fists, the lunch lady beckoned him onwards. "Pork or beef with your rice?" she asked, gesturing to the options. Hitoshi just raised an eyebrow, pointing at the muzzle. The lady sighed, reaching into her apron. "Ah, yes, the villain kid. The kid with the brainwashing quirk." She pulled a key from her pocket and, reaching over the counter, unlocked Hitoshi's mask. "Eat your food and come back. You'll need me to put this back on." The lunch lady pulled the mask from Hitoshi's face and grimaced at the saliva dribbling from the metal rod. She glared at Hitoshi like this was personally his fault and shooed him away. "She forgot to give me food. The hag," he growled to himself, but just before he noticed a bright red exit sign posted on the wall. Looking around to ensure nobody could see him, it was a crowded lunchroom, so that hope went out the window quickly. Hitoshi threw open the door and ran. The boy's feet padded on pavement, the thin soles of his sneaker giving way in the toe, making every step snap on his toes painfully, torturing the already bruised feet underneath. 10 minutes later, Hitoshi's sprint had become a crawl, his underfed muscles giving out early as he stumbled down the street to his destination. "Kyoto and Sons Law," the sign advertised. When Hitoshi saw those words, he picked up his pace again, huffing and puffing by the time he reached the door. A bell chimed as the boy walked in, out of breath and covered in sweat. "I need to see a lawyer," he demanded, walking through the small, empty waiting room and up to the desk. The receptionist looked him up and down, nose upturned at the sight and smell of the child. "Name and date of birth," he stated simply, tapping his pen repetitively on the desk. Hitoshi Shinso," the boy said, not eager to call himself by his new parents' family name, but lacking another option. "I was born in July of 2319. I don't know the exact day, though." The boy scratched nervously at his arm as he spoke, suddenly feeling as though Kataza or Asano could walk through the door at any moment. The receptionist raised an eyebrow at this. "You don't know your date of birth? You're kidding me, right?" "No!" Hitoshi yelled, agitated. He regretted it immediately, though, and softened his tone. "No, please, I need to know how I can emancipate myself from my parents. Look, kid, if you don't know your own birthday, then you don't have a birth certificate either, do you?" the receptionist asked, his pen tapping faster. "No, but You're out of luck." The pen stopped tapping, now lifted into the air and pointed directly at Hitoshi. "Without an ID or any information, we can't file you any paperwork." But then how can I get my birth certificate? The boy asked, losing faith in his plan as time went on. The receptionist just shrugged. Be your own legal guardian, I guess. Hitoshi's last straw broke. His quirk activated instantly. But that's what am I supposed to do then? Please, I'll do anything. The man's gaze softened for a moment as he saw the tears begin to stream down the child's face, but just as he spoke, well, Hitoshi caught the man in a trance. Do whatever you can to get me away from my parents, he demanded, wiping the tears from his eyes. He didn't have any other options but to brainwash. Hitoshi knew there was no turning back now. As the clerk stood, picking up his phone, Hitoshi thought he saw something strange in his eyes, an alertness not seen in any other victims of his quirk. On any other day, he would have caught that detail and known that something was wrong. Today was not that day. 9321 Sakura Street. The receptionist droned as he called a number on his phone. Yes, it's a code orange. How are you doing that? Hitoshi hissed at the man. His quirk shouldn't let people talk and think on their own. Something was wrong. Tell me how you're doing that, the boy demanded, backing away from the desk. Yeah, he's a flight risk. Send someone fast, the man said, monotone quality of his voice dropping as he watched Hitoshi out of the corner of his eye. As he hung up the phone, Hitoshi backed away further before turning and bolting out the door. It wasn't 12 seconds later that a shadow above the boy got bigger quickly, looming overhead just before he felt something grab him from below his armpits and lift him into the air. You're a troublemaker, aren't you? Hawks, the number 3 pro hero, asked, grinning. That grin. Hitoshi had always found it insufferable. It represented to him all of the disgusting, fake heroes that never did what they claimed to do, never suffered like the people they were tasked with protecting. An underground hero like Eraserhead would never. Let me go, Hitoshi demanded. He struggled as much as he could, but Hawks' grip was impenetrable. You don't want to do that. It's a long way down, the hero said, and oh no. Hitoshi realized in that moment just how far up he was, and how Hawks' grip was the only thing between him and the pavement below. I heard you tried some mental quirk on that clerk back there. Thank goodness he has an immunity to those types of powers. You wouldn't believe how often this happens to that dude. I swear. Hitoshi missed the rest of the hero's rant, already passed out from fear. So, he's finally awake. The voice of Isano greeted Hitoshi as he woke, eyes blinking back sleep as he found himself in an all-too-familiar basement. It was only dimly lit, so it was likely between the afternoon and evening. Without a clock, though, Hitoshi couldn't be sure. The taste of copper was in the boy's mouth, not only from the metal bar grinding on his teeth, but mixed in was the taste of blood, tangy and ionic. A taste seemingly originated from the back left end of his mouth, where the muzzle had scratched a thin but deep cut into his gums. You went behind our back and disobeyed us, Kataza glared, looming over the boy. I told you you'd be losing privileges for that, and I, unlike you, boy, always keep my promises. You've been withdrawn from school, Isano chimed in. They were all too glad to get rid of you, honestly. Hitoshi thrashed against Kataza's arms in futility, howling in absolute fury at the couple. Parents take care of their children. Parents don't do this. This isn't normal. Oh my, it doesn't look as though we're getting through to him, Isano sighed. Boy, you've lost your food and water privileges today, and if you keep this up, we'll make it 2. Hitoshi ceased his thrashing, taken aback. No food or water. Were they psychopathic? Isano took her husband's hand and began to walk up the stairs, startling Hitoshi out of his thoughts. He scrambled after them, trying desperately to climb the stairs and escape through the door. If only he could reach the door! Get off! Kataza snapped, shoving Hitoshi down, where he tumbled down the stairs harshly to the floor below. His jaw met concrete, and Hitoshi felt a flash of pain light up through his mouth as he felt the unbound tip of his tongue be sliced by his front teeth. The taste of copper worsened as Hitoshi felt the sickening texture of a thin slice of flesh sitting on his bottom lip. The boy heard the door click shut and lock, and he desperately clawed at the piece of his tongue still hanging on via a nerve-ridden thread and spitting out the mouthfuls of blood that flowed endlessly from his mouth. He had to lean his head forwards just to not choke, sobbing in pain and fear as he desperately attempted to stop his bleeding tongue. He whipped his head around, searching in vain for his bag. The basement was empty. His clothes, everything he had, his eraser head, they were gone. With no other options, Hitoshi began to rip at his t-shirt, pulling away strips of fabric and stuffing them into his mouth to block the bleeding. Eventually, the rivulet slowed, and Hitoshi had a chance to breathe. Albeit, his full-mouth gag meant he could only breathe through his nose, but it was a breath nonetheless. Hitoshi turned bloodshot eyes to the door, that evil door, and was alit with rage. Swept up like a raging typhoon, he ran up the stairs, skipping each second step as he went, and began to bang on the door, screeching in absolute rage through his gag, tiny flecks of blood spraying the wooden surface. He pounded the wood. He kicked at the hinges. He even headbutted the doorknob. Everything that he did with a desperate, furious kind of determination, the kind that begged and fought and did whatever it could to survive. It was futile. The door was heavy, and from his lowered stance, Hitoshi had no way to gain leverage without risking falling down the stairs again. Still, the boy wasn't done yet. He clambered down the stairs and began to search every inch of the room, the dim light from the window barely illuminating his surroundings. He pounded on the CMU walls, searching for a loose brick or stray tool, anything. Hitoshi tripped on the uneven floor, just barely catching himself to avoid another accident. He screamed, a guttural sound laced with pain and sorrow, large tears rolling down his face as he pounded red and raw fists on the ground again and again and again. The boy didn't sleep well that night. Pain lacing his every being from every angle, not helped in the slightest by the bare, concrete floor. If I just had a pillow, the boy thought as he nodded off, hours of restless pain having already passed him by. I don't need anything else, just a pillow, please. Rumbling awoke Hitoshi, the telltale sound of a car leaving the house. Wiping bleary fog from his eyes, he stretched, sending stinging pain throughout his muscles. My tongue, Hitoshi thought, seeing the brown stains on the floor, spots and splatters leading across the room, tracking Hitoshi's movements from the day before. Shaking hands reached up to pull the gag out of his own mouth, and he winced as he felt the sharp sting of pain that came when he tugged at the end of the shirt bonded to his wound, the scab having grown connected to the fabric. The child felt lightheaded as he pulled the shirt away, making the wound resume its bleeding, although it had slowed to a dribble over the night. Whether that was due to the blood loss or the nausea from seeing the dark tint to the fabric was irrelevant. At this moment, he took his first breath of air through his mouth, and the stench hit him. It wasn't the copper scent that permeated the air, or the usual musty basement smell, no. It was the bucket. Hitoshi had been trying to not think about the bucket. The innocent-seeming white container radiating a deathly smelling aura. No. Every breath Hitoshi took, he could smell it. It was overpowering, the septic stench almost clouding the air like a malignant tumor. Hitoshi closed his eyes, trying his best to ignore the stench and his need to relieve himself. He knew that the longer he stayed, the worse his conditions would become. Hours passed. Nothing. Silence. The quiet became so overwhelming that Hitoshi just wished he would start talking to himself if only he could form the words. But he wasn't allowed that luxury. The car rumbled as it came home, and Hitoshi instinctively climbed up the stairs. The loneliness of the basement below seemed to draw him upwards to where the chatter of voices could be heard. Hitoshi heard another voice that he assumed was the TV, and then the voice of Kataza as he walked down the hallway that led to the basement door. When he passed by, Hitoshi let out his best scream, although he only managed a dry gurgle, the breath catching in his throat that had craved water for too long. Weak hands pounded on the abused door, begging for release from the prison they were kept in. "Shut it!" Kataza yelled back, pounding on the door once. He only needed once. Hitoshi flinched backwards, suddenly afraid of the man. He slunk back down the stairs, or at least he tried to. Halfway down, the boy needed to lower himself to sitting, scooting down the stairs one by one. His body hurt too much to continue, and his fear of falling had only increased as time went on. Hitoshi tried to sleep early, but the sounds of laughter and lively family conversation above him kept him awake. Their happiness tortured his ears. And when the adults upstairs had gone to bed, Hitoshi missed the noise. The quiet was worse than the torture. The car left the driveway. Hitoshi bolted up as he heard the noise, but when he checked, his breakfast wasn't there. They forgot, Hitoshi thought. They actually forgot my food. And it wasn't even the food that he had the biggest problem with. It was the lack of water. It had gotten so bad, the boy's mouth becoming so dry and cracked, that he looked, for just 1 second, at the bucket in the corner. The thought had revolted Hitoshi so much, however, that he spent the next half an hour dry heaving, gagging on the air's stench alone. It was just after noon, when the sun came through the window at just the right angle, that Hitoshi noticed something strange. It was on the floor, or rather, it was the floor. A single square-meter section of the concrete floor seemed elevated slightly, likely the reason why Hitoshi had tripped the night previous. Hitoshi walked up to the section slowly, as if afraid it would escape him. He kneeled down, jamming fingers into the space between and prying the stone up. It took effort, and at one point it slipped, jamming the boy's index and middle fingers, nearly breaking them with its weight, but after some struggle, the boy managed to lift it. Hope bloomed in Hitoshi's chest as he stared down into a dark hole. It's an escape, he marveled. If I can crawl out, I can... Hitoshi looked inside the hole, finding there was no tunnel. It was just a cubby space below the foundation, less than a cubic meter in area. The boy let the stone crash back into place, devastated. I'm really stuck. The edges of his eyes stung. They burned with unsung tears, liquid that would never leave his body, his dehydration so extreme that his body considered even grief a waste. Instead, he was empty. His pain was the only grounding thing left, the sole thing keeping Hitoshi alive. Ironic, wasn't it? The car returned again. Hitoshi crawled up the stairs. He couldn't walk anymore, limbs too weak to even attempt it at this point. When he knocked on the door, his arm was too weak to manage anything beyond a tap. Still, he kept it up, tapping lightly but consistently. A few minutes later, a time that stretched into eternity, Asano opened the door. "What?" she asked tersely, clearly unenthused. Hitoshi tried his best to pantomime eating and drinking. Asano's eyes narrowed before realization cut in. "What of it?" she asked the boy. Hitoshi tried, throat failing him as he tried, in vain, to form words, to beg, to grovel. "You lost that privilege," Asano simply stated. "For 2 days, 3 if you misbehave." No, it was only 1 day, and I waited." Hitoshi's thoughts felt scrambled, and at this point he couldn't tell if the woman was telling the truth anymore. Maybe he was wrong. A mother wouldn't lie to him. It was 2 days, not 1. Hitoshi sank down further, almost laying on the stair. He breathed out a dry breath, trying in vain to rein in his thoughts. The door closed. It closed. "It's dark in here," Hitoshi absently thought as he stumbled down the stairs on his knees. I feel cold." Hitoshi's shivering hands clawed at the stone trap door. He was struggling to lift it, for some reason he didn't even know himself. He dragged the stone to the wall, mind as blank as one of his brainwashing victims. He leaned the stone against the wall and climbed on top. He stood up to his full height, allowing him to reach the windows. With trembling hands, the boy clambered up the wall, pounding small fists against the glass. Almost impossibly, Hitoshi looked into the evening sky. With a guttural show of rage, he punched through the glass. Bleeding, heaving, and with rapidly bruising knuckles, Hitoshi tasted the first fresh air he had had in an eternity. He pulled away at the shards of glass, tiny pieces cutting into his palms as he dug his way to freedom, clawing his way up and trying desperately to squeeze through the too small window. Hitoshi fit by a hair, sent extreme loss of weight allowing him to pass through the exit and see the outside world. Stumbling to his feet, Hitoshi first thought of running, escaping deep into the night, but then he remembered Hawks. He would catch me. I need... The child looked to the rooftops, a delirious plan forming in his head. Racerhead. I just need him. He's my hero. Shinso climbed the home's fire escape, hands clutching the handlebars violently as he tried not to look down. Racerhead. He patrols the city. If I see him, he'll save me. Shinso stumbled onto the roof, not realizing that the stairs had ended already. Did I zone out? He shook his head, regretting it instantly as a roaring pain bloomed behind his eyes, a headache far greater than any he had gotten from quirk overuse. What? He's on the roof! The brat! Hitoshi heard a feminine voice yell, but he was completely disassociated at this point. Hitoshi called, begging the night air for his hero to appear. The sound of someone clambering up the fire escape. Yellow goggles and a billowing scarf in the distance, and Hitoshi only cared about one of these things. Was all he could manage before he broke down, coughing and sobbing as small droplets of blood ran down the boy's throat, the only liquid it had seen in days. A hero descended onto a well-furnished, single-family home in the center of Mochizuki City. The roof was empty, but he did know two things. He knew that he saw a teenage-sized child desperately trying to sneak out of a home, crying into the night, and he knew that the smell on the air was blood. Hitoshi awoke to total darkness. It had become a familiar presence at this point. He felt a dull ringing in the back of his head and a sticky feeling of blood on his temple. He tried to touch his head to feel, but his arm wouldn't move. The thought drifted out of the boy's head loosely, gone as soon as it had came. The back of his head ached and his pupils hurt, feeling sensitive to light that wasn't even there. All he could remember was slamming his head into a wall as someone dragged him through a doorway, and before that, Eraserhead. A hero dressed in a dark suit, with a loose gray scarf around his shoulders, knocked on a painted red doorway, a slip of paper held up in plain view. In a moment, the door opened and a couple appeared. Yes? The woman asked, looking nervous as she stared at the hero. I have a warrant to search your home under suspicion of villainous activity, ma'am, the hero stated plainly, walking past the couple and into the home. Do you have any children living at home with you? Aisano looked at Kataza worriedly. There's our son Hitoshi. Why? Is he in trouble? Eraserhead shook his head, striding through the doorway and up the stairs. Which room is his? He asked tersely, opening every door he saw without waiting for an answer. Each room was empty until he reached the final door at the end of the hall. He swung it open and was greeted by the sight of what looked to be a teenage boy's room. Dirty clothes were strewn on the floor, and what looked like an Eraserhead plushie. It was clearly handmade. It sat innocently on the bed's pillow. Fun kid, Eraserhead remarked, smiling under his capture weapon when he saw the doll. Yeah, he's a perfect kid, Kataza grinned. Honor roll, with a flashy quirk. Eraserhead's smile faltered slightly at the word, both not exactly enthused that parents would define their child's worth on a flashy quirk, and also as he was already disliking this kid. It was always those kids with flashy quirks, the ones who rebelled against their parents and decided they knew best. Still, Eraserhead was a hero. He needed to do his due diligence, so he continued to search the rooms for signs of abuse. Eraserhead searched high and low, kitchen to bathroom, but saw nothing. Signs of a loving couple and a tastefully decorated home. Eraserhead stopped at the basement doorway. What's down here? Taza gruffly replied, shrugging to the door. Just a basement. Great. Aizawa turned the knob, unlocked, and walked down the stairs. The lights were on. As the hero descended, he was met with a harsh, grating smell. It wasn't copper, though, not the ionic scent of blood, but sewage, the hero asked, screwing up his nose in disgust. We had a sewage line burst recently, Isano spoke softly, abashed. We thought it wouldn't be proper to bring a hero down here. I see. Razorhead grimaced, giving the room one final look as he walked around, inspecting every corner. The room was completely empty, aside from a few shards of broken glass around the west end. The floor was damp, as if it had been recently mopped. A single circle of lighter gray stood out in the corner of the room, apparently untouched by the water. Razorhead deduced that all of this meant absolutely nothing. Sorry for bothering you. I appear to have made a mistake. Oh, it was no trouble at all, Mr. Hero. Isano waved him off. We're just grateful that somebody cares so much about our little Hitoshi. He's been getting into all sorts of trouble lately, hanging around a bad crowd. She broke off into a sob, burying her face into her husband's shoulder. I see how it is, Eraserhead nodded. This kind of thing happens a lot with kids who get flashier quirks than their classmates. He just hasn't learned to be humble yet. The hero scoffed, thinking of cases just like this one, where students of his had grown too big for their britches, their pride taking a hold over their personality. He's lucky to have parents like you. He should be grateful for all you've done for him. Isano pulled herself away from her partner, grateful tears in her eyes. Why, thank you. I understand you have to leave soon, but might I interest you in a glass of tea? The hero grimaced. No thank you. I'll be taking my leave now. With that final word, the pro-hero Eraserhead turned and walked up the stairs and out of the Shinso household. Sorry for bothering you. I appear to have made a mistake. When Hitoshi heard the voice of his hero right over his head, he realized where he was. He realized why he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Hitoshi struggled to get up, to push the concrete slab off his back, to slide away the stone keeping him entombed, and oh no, this was a tomb. Hitoshi struggled for breath, the pitch-black hole he was trapped in hardly giving him room to close his eyes, begging to be released, begging his body to obey him, begging his parents to gain some humanity, begging... Wait. Eraserhead was standing right above Hitoshi. If he could just yell, just alert the hero, he could... But his voice was dry. There was nothing left to say. All Hitoshi could do was breathe heavily, the warm air from his mouth coming back to blow across his face. He tried to scream. He really tried his best, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. Even if I could scream, Eraserhead wouldn't hear me through the stone. Besides, would he help me anyways? I bet Isano would just explain that away too. Tell him that I'm covered with dirt because I've been out destroying property or something. He should be grateful for all you've done for him. Yeah, Hitoshi thought, arms losing their tension, ceasing in their efforts to free himself. I'm just a villain anyways. I'm not worth his time. I really should be grateful. This is better than being on the street. Hitoshi's vision went black as his mind failed to continue fighting. The sound of songbirds awoke the boy, the sun hitting his eyes and burning them with glorious light. His limbs would hardly let him move, but the will to exit the hole outweighed any desire Hitoshi had to avoid pain at this point, so he crawled. Slowly, the boy crawled on his belly, conserving as much energy as possible. His mission was clear. A green cup. It sat on the bottommost stair, warm and inviting. Hitoshi had always loved green. He took the cup and tipped it to his lips, greedily drinking every drop he could, and silently grieving each one that spilled out due to his muzzle. The cup was half full. Shinso Hitoshi appreciated that his parents would give him that much. He turned to see if there was more water, but there was only a plate piled high with saltine crackers. Hitoshi smacked his lips, mouth already feeling dry, begging him not to partake. His stomach said otherwise. With trembling fingers, Hitoshi brought a handful of crackers to his mouth, fitting them through his muzzle one by one, savoring the salty taste after days of starvation. When he tried to chew, however, the muzzle prevented him from doing so. Breathing heavily, Hitoshi waited for a moment for the saliva to dissolve the crackers, but the water he drank had already sunk into his skin, evaporating like it was poured into a desert. So with still trembling hands, Hitoshi put his fingers into his own mouth, crushing up the crackers manually. They powdered easily, crumbling into tiny, dry flakes. His tongue trapped, Hitoshi remembered his predicament with swallowing too late. The child's eyes opened wide as a half-cracker fell back into his throat, causing him to gag instinctively. Clouds of dust flying out of his muzzle's opening, the crackers getting piled up and stuck. Hitoshi needed to use his fingers to dig away the food, clearing an opening before he could safely breathe again. Hitoshi's eyes burned, tears unable to form, yet the child could almost feel them slipping down his cheeks. He curled into a ball, hiccuping and sobbing at the sight of the crackers spilled across the floor. Wasted. Useless. Messy. Mother always hated it when Hitoshi was messy. Rising to his knees, the boy scrambled, trying in vain to sweep the cracker dust into the palm of his hand, dropping what he could into a pile on the plate. He backed away from his breakfast after that, not willing to give it another go. Food is evil, Hitoshi thought, still delirious. Was the room spinning? Why was the room spinning? Blackbird singing in the dead of night, a voice sang, waking Hitoshi from a restless slumber. He turned bleary eyes to see Mom, standing overhead, a lovely green glass of water in hand. Hitoshi giggled silently. That cup was his friend. It was green, like cats. Hitoshi always liked cats. You're my songbird, you know, Mom smiled sweetly. The only difference is, you don't sing. The woman cackled at her own joke, and Hitoshi laughed along as best he could. Mom is so funny, he thought. That made him sad for some reason, though he didn't know why. Goodness, my silent songbird. If I catch you singing again, you're losing privileges. Hitoshi's laughter dropped immediately. Whatever that meant, it couldn't be good. Privileges, those were good or bad. Why did it hurt the boy's head to think about, so he just stopped. Mom left the room, walking up the stairs to the outside. Hitoshi followed her with his gaze as she left, though he wasn't lifting his head from the concrete floor as he did so. I want my mom, he thought faintly. I don't want to be alone. A plan clicked in the boy's subconscious and he began to move. Inch by inch, he made his way across the floor, moving ever closer to the window. Something glimmered on the floor, and the moment he saw it, his crawling sped up, if only slightly. Hitoshi's hands gripped a long shard of glass, and with a heave of effort, he turned himself onto his back. Shaking hands brought the shard to his neck, and Hitoshi looked up to see, through the glare of sunlight, a tiny baby bird standing in the empty window frame. The bird just looked down at the boy, eyes gazing but never saying a word. That's right, Hitoshi smiled to himself. I'm just like you. I'm a silent songbird. Glass met flesh as the shard plunged into Hitoshi's neck. And that's the end of A Silent Songbird. I hope you enjoyed this, or at least were able to make it to the end. This was my first attempt at writing real angst, so I kind of hope I got the angst down good. Got it. I kind of understand hope I understand the genre of angst. This was depressing to write. It was interesting to write for sure. I wrote it all in one day, like 7,000 words in a span of like 12 hours or something, and that was kind of all a blur. I'm surprised I managed to get it to this quality in just one day. But couple things before I end this off here. Firstly, although it's never mentioned explicitly in the fic, Isano's quirk is something that essentially allows her to manipulate more easily. She sort of knows what to say and do in order that she's like lucky, right? Like she knows what to say and do so that she always gets what she wants. For example, knowing to put Hitoshi in the concrete floor and put him in the trapdoor, even if she doesn't really know why. Those kind of things. Things always seem to work out in her favor, which is partly what makes Hitoshi's situation so hopeless, right? Anyways, that's all I have for today. Thank you all so much for listening.